I showed up to my daughter's wedding in the best suit I own. Navy blue, worsted wool, the one Carol picked out for me at Nordstrom in Buckhead 17 years ago. She had pulled it off the rack, held it up against me in the middle of the men's section, and said it made me look like I had arrived somewhere. I never fully understood what she meant by that. I think I understand it now. Ashley was waiting for me outside the Peachtree Country Club, not inside greeting guests the way a bride should be on the most important day of her life. She was standing at the front entrance in a $12,000 gown that had come directly out of my checking account, and the set of her jaw was one I hadn't seen since she was 16 and determined to go to Cancun without supervision. "Dad," her voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk." I said hello. I told her she looked beautiful because she did. I opened my arms to hug her. She stepped back. "You can't come in." I've heard hard things in my 68 years. I heard the doctor use the word terminal about my wife. I heard the last voicemail Carol ever left me, the one she didn't know was her last. Something about picking up milk and asking if I wanted her to stop by the hardware store. I've heard things I can't unhear. But standing there in that parking lot in my navy blue suit, with the Georgia heat pressing down on us like a hand and 300 people waiting inside, hearing my daughter tell me I wasn't welcome at the wedding I had paid for, that was a different kind of hard. A kind I didn't have a name for yet. "I didn't invite you, Dad, I'm sorry." She said it the way people say they're sorry when they aren't. When they've decided something and are only apologizing to make the conversation shorter. "Tyler's family has made it clear that your presence would make things uncomfortable, that you don't quite fit the image they want for this event." The image. I turned the word over in my head the way you do when a word stops making sense. The image. I had coached a t-ball team in Alpharetta when she was 7. I'd sat in the parking lot of Piedmont Hospital for 9 hours while Carol was in surgery, and called Ashley every 45 minutes so she wouldn't be scared, even though I was terrified myself. I had co-signed her first apartment when her credit wasn't good enough, paid down her credit card 3 separate times when the balance got out of hand, written a check for a boutique she opened and closed in 8 months, another for a yoga certification she completed and never used, another for what was supposed to be 1 semester studying abroad in Barcelona that became 2. I had been a lot of things to a lot of people over the years. A father, a husband, a financial advisor, a quiet man in a good suit. But apparently none of that was the right image. "You're a retired accountant, Dad." She said it carefully, the way you say something you've rehearsed. "Tyler's family are builders, developers. The Harrington Group just landed the biggest commercial contract in Forsyth County this year. His father, Richard, is being featured in the Atlanta Business Chronicle next month. They have a certain circle, a certain level, and you—" She stopped. She looked almost apologetic. Almost. "You just don't fit the picture they want to present." I looked at my daughter for a long moment, at the brown eyes she'd gotten from her mother, at the cheekbones, at the precise way she tilted her chin when she'd made up her mind about something. A habit so Carol that it used to make my throat close up. "My money fits, though," I said. She had the grace to blush, just slightly. "That's different." I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. My hands were steady. That surprised me a little, honestly. "Before you go back inside, check your phone, messages, email, bank account." "Dad, the ceremony starts in 20 minutes. "I know, just look." She frowned the way she used to when she thought I was wasting her time, pulled out her iPhone, the newest model on my account, and started scrolling. "What am I looking for?" "You'll know." Here's what Ashley didn't know. For the 2 weeks since Tyler Harrington had called me on a Thursday evening in my study, I had been very, very busy. That call came at 8:45. I was in the study, the same room where Carol used to appear at 9 o'clock with a cup of decaf she insisted I drink instead of regular, her hand on my shoulder for just a moment before she went upstairs. I was reading when my phone rang and I saw Tyler's name. He told me, in the smoothest, most carefully composed voice I have ever heard from a 29-year-old, that his family had concerns about the guest list. He used phrases like maintaining a certain level and the image we want to project. He explained that a retired accountant, his exact words, didn't quite fit in among the developers, investors, and politicians who would be in attendance. I asked whether Ashley knew about this call. He paused. Not a long pause, half a beat. The pause of someone who has rehearsed most of the conversation, but not quite that question. "She's in agreement," he said. Actually, it was her suggestion. I did not respond. I sat in Carol's reading chair by the window, the one with the faded floral armrests I'd never been able to make myself replace. And I looked out at the backyard where she used to spend Saturday mornings in her gardening gloves, moving things around with a seriousness that made you think the placement of flowers was a matter of great consequence. "I understand," I said. I hung up. I did not sleep that night. I sat at that desk and I thought carefully about what I knew. Ashley's apartment in Midtown was in my name because her income hadn't qualified for the loan. The white Range Rover she drove was registered to me because the insurance came out cheaper that way. The credit card she used freely, for the dress, for bridesmaid gifts, for a weekend at the Biltmore in Asheville she and Tyler took in February to decompress before the wedding, was attached to my account. And the wedding itself, every dollar of it, had come from my accounts over 14 months. The Italian cardstock invitations, the rehearsal dinner at Aria, the floral arrangements, the open bar, the photographer, the honeymoon in Santorini. $483,000, nearly $500,000, for a wedding where I was apparently too low class to be a guest. The next morning I made 3 phone calls before 8 o'clock. First, I called James Whitfield, my estate attorney. We'd worked together for 22 years. He picked up on the second ring because James Whitfield always picks up on the second ring. "James, I need to revise my will, completely." A pause. "How completely, Bob?" "Remove Ashley entirely. Everything goes to the Carol Henderson Foundation for Children's Cancer Research. Carol and I talked about setting it up for years. Let's do it this week." Another pause. "Bob, that's a significant—" "I know what it is. Start the paperwork." Second, I called Dave at Wells Fargo, 15 years my contact there. "Dave, I need to remove Ashley from everything. The credit card authorization, the cosign on the Midtown apartment, all automatic transfers, effective immediately." A long silence. "That's going to leave her in a difficult position, Bob." "Yes," I said, "it will. That's the idea." Third, I called Sharon at Peachtree Country Club. I explained that as the card holder on all event charges, I had rights to dispute pending transactions. I asked her to confirm that without a resolved payment, no event could proceed on the 15th. She confirmed it. I told her to expect a call from me on the morning of the wedding. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever given everything you had, your time, your money, your presence, your love, and ended up standing in a parking lot being told you weren't good enough for the table you'd spent your whole life building, I want you to know, what I felt in that study the night after Tyler's call was not rage. It wasn't grief either, exactly. It was something quieter and colder than both. It was clarity. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I've heard from people in Ohio, Texas, Florida, places I'll never visit, who've been through some version of this. You're not alone. Hit subscribe because what happened next in that parking lot is the part I haven't gotten to yet. And it is worth staying for. Ashley had gone the color of the concrete. "There's a message from an attorney," she said. Her voice had lost all of its rehearsed composure. "It says, you revised your will." She looked up at me. "It says I've been completely removed." "That's correct. The Carol Henderson Foundation receives everything upon my passing. Approximately $4.5 million in liquid assets plus the house and investment accounts. In your mother's honor. She'd been asking me to set it up for years." "You can't do that." A quiet fury started moving behind her eyes. Dad, you cannot just... Check the Wells Fargo notification, I said. The credit card was canceled this morning. The cosign on your apartment was filed for removal yesterday. Dave tells me the bank will need full payment or documented qualifying income by Monday. And there's a message from Sharon at Peachtree. I kept my voice even. I wasn't performing calm. I actually felt calm. As the card holder, I disputed the outstanding charges this morning. Without confirmed payment, the event cannot proceed. Sharon is waiting on a call. Tyler appeared in a doorway behind Ashley at that exact moment. Linen suit, hair arranged with the kind of careful precision that announces itself. Every inch of him telegraphing a story about what he was and what he would become. Ashley, what is going on out here? The guests have been seated for 15. Your father-in-law just canceled our wedding, she said. He looked at me. His expression started as confusion and then moved towards something else as he read my face. Excuse me? I didn't cancel anything, I said. I stopped funding it. There's a distinction. And here is where everything came apart. Tyler looked at Ashley, and his voice dropped to something precise and cold. You told me your family had money put aside for this. You told me your father had investment accounts. He does, she said. I did, I agreed. Past tense as it pertains to Ashley. Present tense, yes. I'm not without resources, Tyler. I'm actually quite far from it. I reached into my jacket pocket and produced a single card. Plain white. Henderson Financial Group. Retirement and Wealth Management. My name. I managed private wealth for 35 years, I said. Client portfolios ranging from $8 to $15 million. I worked with 23 families in the Atlanta metro area. Some of them are inside that room right now, waiting for a ceremony that is not going to happen today. Several of them play golf with me regularly. The Whitmore family, who are seated at table 6, have been trying to get an introduction to a specific private equity contact of mine for the better part of 2 years. I watched Tyler's eyes change. But none of that is here nor there. Richard Harrington came to the door then, a large man, 63, maybe 64. The bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in a room because he had been made to feel that way so consistently that he'd stopped questioning it. He looked at me with the particular contempt of a man who has already made up his mind. You're the accountant, he said. Retired wealth manager, I said. There's a difference there, too. Whatever you think you're accomplishing here, this is not the time or the venue needs $220,000 in the next 12 minutes, I said, or Sharon is going to begin asking your guests to leave. I wanted to make sure you had the full picture. The silence that followed was the best silence of my life. I will not pretend otherwise. I am not a man who takes pleasure in other people's suffering. I sat with Ashley in a hospital waiting room and would have absorbed every ounce of her pain if I could have. But watching Richard Harrington's face move through disbelief and fury and something that looked genuinely, unmistakably like panic, I felt 68 years old and I felt completely at peace. 220,000, he repeated, as if the number were in a foreign language. That's the venue balance alone. Catering has a separate outstanding charge. The Santorini booking I had canceled directly. The travel agent's name is Lisa. She's very efficient. She'll be happy to discuss the refund policy with you. His wife, Diane, had come outside. She stood slightly apart from her husband, and there was something different in her expression. The quiet look of someone correcting a misidentification. You paid for all of it, she said. $483,000, I said, over 14 months. She put her hand on Richard's arm. He shrugged her off. You've made your point. Fine. But don't humiliate 300 people who had nothing to do with this. 300 people your family invited to an event they didn't pay for, I said. I didn't invite anyone. I just signed the checks. And I wasn't invited to attend. Sharon appeared at the top of the steps. I'm very sorry, but we need a resolution in the next 8 minutes, or I'll need to begin directing guests toward the exits. Richard made 2 phone calls. Neither produced the money. Tyler moved through the guests inside trying to explain something. I could see him through the glass, hands moving, face tight. Ashley stood on the steps with her dress train dragging on the concrete and her mascara tracking down both cheeks, and she looked like a woman who had just understood something she could not un-understand. The wedding was officially canceled at 11:47 in the morning. 300 guests were told by text, then by staff, then by one another, the last method being by far the most efficient. I stood by my car and watched them leave in clusters, voices low, phones already out. Richard Harrington made 3 more calls in the parking lot. Tyler and Ashley stood at the top of the steps and they were not touching. I drove home. I heated up leftover chicken from Tuesday. I sat in Carol's reading chair and I read for 2 hours with the windows open. I want to say this carefully because I've thought about it a great deal. This is not a simple story. Ashley is my daughter. She has Carol's eyes, Carol's stubbornness, Carol's laugh when something genuinely catches her off guard. She also spent 3 years accepting my support as something owed to her and let another family talk her into treating me like I didn't belong. Both of those things are true. I hold both of them. That's what it means to be a parent. 6 months after the canceled wedding, my phone rang on a Sunday morning while I was still half in a dream about Carol. I almost let it go to voicemail. Hi, Dad. She had a job, operations director at a supply chain company in Dunwoody. She and Tyler had split 2 months after the canceled wedding. When the money stopped and what was left was just the 2 of them and the Harrington family's expectations, she said, they found they didn't actually have much to say to each other. She had her own apartment, 1 bedroom in Decatur, rent paid with her own paycheck. Do you want to get coffee sometime? I told her to meet me Sunday at 10 at my regular place on Ponce. I was there at 9:50. She came in at 10:03. Jeans, simple white top, and around her neck Carol's pearl necklace. I had sent it 2 weeks earlier with a note. Your mother wanted you to have this when you were ready to understand what it was worth. I think you're ready now. We sat for 2 hours. We talked about her job, her apartment, a novel she'd been reading that Carol would have liked, and the time she was 9 years old and got separated from me in Costco, and I found her in the furniture section sitting calmly inside a floor display tent, reading the assembly instructions. She laughed at that, Carol's exact laugh. I had to look at my coffee for a moment. When we stood up to leave, she hugged me on the sidewalk outside. A real hug, not an obligatory one. I love you, she said, and I want you to know I'm saying it right now without needing anything from you, just so you can hear the difference. I drove home with the windows down, even though it was barely 50 degrees. It just felt right. I'm 68 years old. I have more money than I will ever spend. I have a foundation that's going to fund cancer research in Carol's name for decades. And I have a daughter who is learning, slowly and honestly and on her own terms, who she actually wants to be. I would not change a single thing. Not the navy blue suit, not the parking lot, not the look on Richard Harrington's face when he realized what he had turned away from the door because he thought he already knew what it was. Carol would have had something to say about all of it, probably something sharp and funny and completely true. She always did. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. I put out a new one every week, and every one of them is true. Leave a like if you believe that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I've heard from people all over this country and farther than that, and every single one of them has reminded me that this kind of story is not as rare as it ought to be. I read every comment. I'll see you in the next one.